Welcome back to the Midwifery Wisdom Podcast. This week, we are so excited to bring you a special episode. Augustine, Leila, and Zul, 3 of our 4 co-hosts, were able to meet live here in Denver, Colorado at the Midwifery Wisdom Conference. And they were able to meet with the incredible Monet Nicole, the genius photographer behind Monet Nicole Birthing Stories. They dive deep into how powerful and beautiful birth photography is, how it's impacted the birthing world as it is, and how it really strengthens and supports the photographer, the midwives, and of course, the birthing family.
So welcome back to the 4th season. What are we on?
I think we're on, well, you have all those mini episodes in between, so those are special.
Well, we have launched again, and welcome back to the Midwifery Wisdom Podcast. And this year, we're really excited to be produced by the Midwifery Wisdom Foundation, which is a new nonprofit to mainstream midwifery care. And we had a really exciting guest today, and we're live.
And we have like almost our entire co-host team here in one table.
The amazing part of being at conference. So I'm really happy to be joined by Leila, my longtime co-host, and Zul. So before we get too far into it, Zul, will you do a little introduction? Where are you? Who are you? What do you do?
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here, especially because we're live. My name is Zul Ruiz. I'm a midwife from Puerto Rico. I currently live in Florida, and I'm a professor, and I'm also the dean of one of the midwifery schools, CCSM.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then our guest today. I cannot tell you how excited I am to have you here. I've been thinking about hosting you here for so long. Monet, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. I was telling you that I am a religious listener of your podcast. So it's a huge honor to be here with you guys today.
That's amazing. Well, for those potential listeners who don't know who you are, will you give us an intro?
Sure. My name is Monet Nicole, and I am a birth photographer. I'm based here in Denver, and I am also the co-founder of Birth Becomes You, which is an amazing online community of birth photographers from all over the world.
It is amazing. And I would say in maybe a large part, birth photography in the U.S. exists because of your advocacy and education efforts. And that's where I want to start first. Is will you dig into that and tell us a little bit about why and how you got started and how this happened?
Absolutely. When I think about birth photography, I go back to really honestly a really dark season in my family's life. I was in Texas. I was getting my MFA. So I'd always been drawn to the arts. And I was in grad school, and about 6 months in, my oldest sister got in a just terrible car accident. And she died, my nephew died, my brother-in-law died. Just really intense, tragic. And we were in the ICU, in the hospital, just immersed in the medical world, obviously in a really tragic situation. And then concurrently, around that same time, my other sister was in Florida with her family, and her 2-year-old son wandered into a backyard, fell in the pool, and wasn't found for several minutes. They did CPR, life flighted him to the Children's Hospital, and he went from this like healthy, vivacious little guy to just completely impacted for the rest of his life. He can't talk. He can't walk. He's on a G-tube. He's an amazing kid, but just life altering. And so my family had these 2 huge tragedies happen really back to back. And my older sister, the one that survived with the little kiddo that had drowned, Ryan, like most parents, like most moms, when something like that happens, you want to do anything, right, to make that better, to help your kiddo. And so she ended up talking to some researchers who were doing a lot of work with stem cells and basically regenerative things that would allow kiddos that had severe cerebral palsy or other kind of brain injuries to potentially get better. And so there was all this experimental treatment going on, but it required stem cells. And obviously they hadn't collected stem cells from any of their kiddos. And so she decided, like, let's have another baby and see if we can use those stem cells to potentially help Ryan. So she got pregnant. She was 40 years old. She had very typical hospital births with her 3 other kiddos. And this pregnancy was kind of like, I think it was the first positive thing that had happened in our family during this season of tragedy. It was this hope and potential for new life and for healing, right? And so it was this really, I think this really important change in our family's dynamic. But you know, I was in Austin, and I happened to like go on, I don't even know where this was being streamed, but I watched The Business of Being Born, and I was like, oh wow, like this is really interesting, you know? And of course I was young, I was in my mid-20s. I was in grad school. I wasn't thinking about babies, but I was like, this is interesting. I need to show this to my sister. So I flew home to Colorado, hosted a baby shower for her. And I was like, you got to just watch this with me. So we sat in her room. She was like 32 weeks pregnant. And she watched it and she was like, Monet, she was like, I don't think I want to go back to the hospital. She's like, I think I want to have a home birth. And I was kind of sitting there being like, oh my gosh, like what have I convinced her to do? You know, it was like, this seems like a big shift. But, you know, she was getting all that typical, like advanced maternal age, and we need to induce you. And we had just spent literally like a year in the hospital with so much intensity, so much intervention, that the thought of like, wait a second, we don't have to go back there was really freeing. And so she decided to do a home birth. She found a home birth midwife in Colorado Springs. And she asked me to come out for the birth. And so I flew home. How we timed this out, now being a birth worker, I don't know how we did this, but we timed it out perfectly. I flew home. She went into labor 48 hours later, and I got to watch this birth. And, you know, it still almost moves me to tears. Obviously, you know, I think when you watch a family member give birth, it's so powerful. But after all that loss and after all of that tragedy, being able to see her give birth to her baby in the safety of her home, I mean, it was just so beautiful. And I had my camera with me because I was doing photography at the time. I was doing like not birth, obviously, doing like food photography. I had my camera and I was like, wow, like this is powerful. Like this is life-changing. Like this is what I want to be documenting. These are the stories I want to be telling. Like, and so I got to be at that birth, and it changed my life, you know. It of course changed our family's life, but it changed my life too. And so that's where it really started. And
What year was that?
That was 2013.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, actually, no, I'm sorry. It was 2012. My daughter was born in 2013, so it was 2012. And I just kind of dived in after that, and really all along the way, I think at the time birth photography was definitely happening in the United States, but it was from this perspective of birth is something that we go to as photographers. We're supposed to be flies on the wall. We're supposed to document what happens, and we're not really supposed to advocate for a lot of change. We're supposed to just be there taking pictures. And I just came with a different perspective of like, you know, if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to be in these spaces, if I'm going to take these images, I want these images to make the world a better place. I want these images to make a difference, not only for the families that I'm serving, but for the larger world. And I really believed from the very beginning that the power of these images was that it really could change the way that birth happens in our country and of course around the world. So.
And it really has. I mean, this is what's so inspiring. Did you ever follow or connect with Melissa Kate?
Yes. Yeah.
So Melissa Kate was the birth photographer I hired when I ran Birth Center in 2010 in Oregon. And I know that the reach that she had, and she only did birth photography for a limited amount of time, but the reach that she had was really extraordinary because it just hit this nerve with people everywhere. Like, oh yes, this is this tremendous life event that has up till now mostly been undocumented. We have some amazing memories and times from that. And one thing I noticed working with Melissa is that she was a mama.
Yes.
Not a birth worker, quote unquote. Now, of course, we do consider birth photography birth workers, but she wasn't. And she was so affected by the experience and learned so much that sometimes she would like fall into an assistant role
Yeah.
kind of unexpectedly or
Yeah.
Like hand them the thing.
yeah, like be like, oh, I know what you're looking for here. You know? I wonder if that's happened to you, and I wonder if like where have you predominantly photographed? You started with this home birth.
Yeah.
I know you have worked with birth centers.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I think the lucky thing about, or the beautiful thing about birth photography is that, I think a lot of doulas primarily end up at the hospital, right? Because that's where a lot of folks need that advocacy and that extra care is hospital birth. So a lot of my doula friends are primarily at the hospital. But birth photographers really get to kind of see all different types of birth. I would say I'm at home births like 30% of the time. I'm at hospital births. I'm at scheduled C-sections. I'm at birth center births. And so I get to really see the full spectrum of what birth looks like in America and in Colorado, which I think is a really unique perspective, because so often, if you're the home birth midwives, they're primarily obviously going to be at home. Maybe they transfer in with clients occasionally, but obviously that's not the norm. And so I feel really lucky that I get to be in all of those spaces. It's very common for me to be, in a home birth in somebody's bathroom, watching a baby come into the world. And then 2 days later, I'm in the OR and I'm watching a cesarean birth and documenting it. I've been to probably, I think, like 800, 900 births now. And so I have a good amount of experience. And yeah, absolutely. Like this fall, especially, I've ended up, I tend to make it to the birth before the midwife often, I think, because I'm really committed. Obviously, I want to document that story, right? And if baby comes before the midwife is there, things are usually fine, baby's healthy, but you're not going to have your pictures if I'm not there. So I tend to be kind of speedy, and I've helped catch a few babies this fall just because I get there before the midwife does.
And just to put this, I was going to say, just to put this in perspective, you need 100 births to graduate. So it's
That's funny.
right. Like just 900 observations. Like I bet you have learned so much nuance.
Yes.
And the ability for you to compare and contrast and see these disparate places of birth.
But one of the things that I've noticed, especially about birth photography, that you don't get as a student midwife or as a doula or as a midwife, is the ability for you to still be a pure witness.
Yes. Yes.
Because even as a doula, there is still this expectation of like, well, if shit hits the fan, you're going to step in and help me, or you're going to take responsibility for whatever. There's still this underlying medical provider, even in the space of a doula, and the student midwife and the birth assistant and the midwife. And so in terms of unassisted births or free births that photographers go to, they're welcome in that space.
Right.
They're still welcome because they don't have the clout that they're going to disturb physiologically. Yes. I mean, if there's someone else in the room, we've already done it, right? You've disturbed it, but not in the way of saying, because there's the fear, right? There's the fear that the midwife is going to overstep my desire. Sometimes, right? I want my birth this way. And the midwife has all this trauma from experiences that she's had. And she may just like walk in and give you a shot in the leg. And you're like, whoa, that's not what we talked about. Well, your birth photographer is not really going to do that, right? They're going to sit in the corner and watch whatever goes down. And I have talked to a few birth photographers who only do unassisted births. Yeah. And sometimes the story is this really beautiful physiological experience that they get to witness and have. And sometimes it's the EMS arriving and being and the change of plans and all of that goes down, that the parents get to have as documentation. Right. And I think that's birth photographers alone hold that space.
Really neat.
Doulas can't hold that.
Right.
Midwife assistants, students, midwives, OBs, nurses. No one can hold that space to only witness, without taking that on.
And I think it's like a blessing and a curse, right? Because as someone who's seen a lot of births and seen a lot of really wonderful, beautiful births that were supported well, it's hard then to go into a space and see that not happen and to feel like, what is my role here? Like,
really,
can I really just sit here and document this and not say like, hey, like this is, but at the end of the day, it is their story, and my job is to document that story and to provide them with resources and support when and if they need that. I don't think people realize how important birth photography is, though, for processing our birth stories.
Yes. Absolutely.
And, where I started out, especially, the majority of people that hired me tended to be people that were like, I don't know, I don't want to use the word, but like kind of like hippies, people that were like really crunchy, really into birth. And it's been interesting to see over the last 10 years how more and more people are starting to recognize and realize that this is a transformational experience.
No matter how
you give birth, no matter if it goes really well or if it goes really poorly, it is transformational. And we think about our birth stories for the rest of our lives. My grandmother gave birth in Louisiana in the 1950s and it's total, twilight sleep, but she would still try to piece together and tell us her birth story all those years later. She had a baby after my mom that passed away, I think 24 hours after birth. We're assuming some kind of congenital heart defect. I don't really know what happened. But she still talked about that baby and that birth for the rest of her life. Mm-hmm. And so I think that, a lot of people are sometimes worried about like, oh gosh, like, or not worried, but just kind of like, why would you have a photographer? Like, why would you capture that? I still think that we have that like misogyny, right, in our culture that still really thinks of birth as something that you don't want to really talk about or you don't really want to see. And I think the beautiful thing about birth photography is that we said, you know what, actually, these images matter and these stories matter. And we've been told that we need to kind of keep this private and not bring this to the surface, but actually these images change us. So these stories change us and these images can help us understand what happened. And a lot of my clients that have really sometimes awful birth stories or birth experiences, they use those images to better understand what happens, to reflect on what happens. And I do think having a photographer in the room for my clients, especially my hospital clients, I do think it changes the kind of care that they receive. And I hate to say that, but it means having a witness there and having somebody that is taking pictures and is documenting what happens, I do think reminds providers that like, hey, like this is
forever
versus forever. Yeah.
And there's some accountability.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Well, I'd be interested, Zul, if yourself and Augustine too, some in some spaces, they're like, no photography on this part. Like you can't photograph that, right? You can't photograph crowning. You can't. And we're like, well, the birthing person's given us permission. So what are you worried about, right? But as midwives, I'm always like, if we have a resuscitation, if we have a hemorrhage, if we have a complication that I've got to manage, please keep snapping. Please keep snapping because I want to look at timestamps.
Yes.
I want to look back and be like, I missed this. Yes. I didn't do that. And you talk about processing for the birthing person, but we really need processing too. Do you feel like that, Sue?
Absolutely. So I had two things in my mind. So a lot of the times I tell my clients that having a birth photographer is like having an out-of-body experience because a lot of the times we don't remember what happened in the birth, even for us. Leila, what you're saying, like we're resuscitating a baby and it takes time to go back because we're moving with emotions, right? And then we go back and it's like that, having this out-of-body experience, like
you see yourself.
Absolutely. In my birth, I thought that I was screaming the whole time like a maniac. And then my birth photographer showed me this picture and there I am with my eyes closed like then. I mean, I know what I was saying in my head, but like the picture doesn't say that.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
We've heard that a lot. People saying things like, I'm sorry I asked for the epidural so many times. I'm like, didn't actually say that.
Yeah, it's like you didn't. So I think I'm in love with birth photography, but I think it's because of all of the things that you get from that.
Yeah.
Or even the power for yourself of like, I did that, but now you're looking at it, right? And
so it makes me think of like self-actualization, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like we need to have food and shelter and emotional connection or whatever, but the pinnacle of that is self-actualization. We have to see ourselves as ourselves.
Yes.
And birth photography does that.
Yes.
It does. And I mean, that's what I love about it. I've done weddings, I've done food photography, I've done portrait work, and it's all fine. But there is something about the realness of being able to depict who this person is, their strength, their courage, their beauty. And it's not the kind of beauty where we, get our hair done and we pick out a perfect outfit. And it's bloody and messy and intense. But I have clients who tell me years down the road that they will watch their birth video right before they have to go in and do an interview, or you know what I mean? Because it gives them this sense of like
confidence.
I can do this. Like I have done hard things and I can do this. And so and I would see, I think especially like that first year postpartum, I think I have a lot of clients too that will look at their birth photos over and over, because you know how intense that first year is. Even if you feel like you're doing a great job, there are days where you're just like, what am I doing wrong? And you feel that lack of confidence, and being able to look at those images and see, wow, like I made it through this, like I'm going to make it through,
or just
whatever.
Overwhelmed, right? Like if you're feeling overwhelmed again, you're like, oh, well, I was overwhelmed once and I made it through. So
yes, absolutely.
Wow.
But I think too, what you spoke on about how, I have timestamps. Midwives are always asking me for timestamps when we're at births that are a little bit, tricky or have some moments that are a little bit difficult. And I think that there is such a gift in being able to sit down with the family after a difficult birth experience and to have some images and to talk through what happened, and to give midwives the opportunity to say, hey, like, let me show you an image of what was happening. Like if there's a shoulder dystocia, like let's talk through what happened here. It can be such an educational opportunity for the family, for the midwife team, and then most importantly, I think for other people. I mean, the people that allow us to share images, not all my families do, but the ones that do, I just think, God, like what a gift and what a difference this can make. Because I have people that follow me from all over the country. And a lot of these people aren't home birth midwives. Many of these people are like nurses in the hospital and have been doing things the same way year after year. And they see an image and they're like, wait a second, like upright birth in the hospital, like this is happening. And it's like, yes, it's happening. This is happening in a major Denver hospital. This is not some, we're not out in the middle of nowhere. Like this is happening, and I think that that's important. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of change happening. I think we're seeing more change happening in the hospitals and at a faster rate than we have in a really long time. And I think it's because of social media, and it's because people are sharing their birth stories, good and bad, and saying, wait a second, like, one, there's a different way of doing this, and two, this happened and this isn't okay. And I think that's making a difference.
That's so powerful. I just want to reflect on some of the points you've made already. Like birth photographers do have this really unique place. They are documentarians, they're witness, they're advocacy, and it's all done through this like click, this lens, this moment captured. And then of course the power of social media multiplies that, but it's extraordinary, really. It's extraordinary. It's an amazing profession. I want to go back to like how it started.
Sure.
I want to hear more, because I know you shifted names partially through, and we all followed along with that, and maybe our listeners don't know. So I'd love to hear, is that what you mean, how she started?
Yeah.
I mean, birth photography in general, I'm sure there's a history there, but that's
Do you know any of that history?
I mean, there was definitely there's been a couple of waves. So there was like a wave that predated me, and those birth photographers, who are amazing people, they were really the ones that a lot of the images were done in black and white. So there was a lot of black and white photography.
Yeah, hiding the blood.
Yes, hiding the blood, hiding the messiness, and there was a lot of focus on the emotion, obviously, which I think is really
close up.
Yes,
you couldn't even show you're out of her.
Right. And I was kind of, again, I'm making these terms up, so I'm sure there's going to be people that will correct me on this. But then I feel like there was the second wave, and that's kind of where I kind of entered in. And those were the birth photographers that were like, wait a second, we really actually want to see this baby crown. Like, we want to see that. We want to see the blood. We want to talk about the amniotic fluid. We want to see, this is not just, it is very much an emotional experience, but there's something so powerful about the physicality of birth, right? What our bodies do to birth our babies. It is fascinating. It is, and I think it's powerful for us to see our bodies in that way,
and
right?
not even just bodies. I think this is what is so profound about birth photography, is that the focus is on the birther.
Right.
But in fact, they're not the only one making space for this new person.
Yes.
A whole family changes.
Yeah.
The whole room, that the
Yeah.
molecules rearrange
Yeah.
for this person to show up. And you capture that. I remember being so amazed by Melissa's pictures early on. It's like, I'll get these photos back, and there are these photos of everyone else behind me.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm there totally focused on this little baby going out, you know,
Yeah.
this mom having a thing.
Yeah.
But behind me, there's like sisters and
Crying.
aunties and doulas and like
Yeah.
this snap bubble.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that emotionality of it is
Yeah.
extraordinary.
Yeah.
Well, I would add there's probably a third wave that happened even before that, and that was like in the 70s.
Yes.
Some early
Yeah, absolutely.
photos. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I'm thinking of photos of Michel Audant's clinic in Pithers, France, or I'm thinking of Chorowski or whatever, the guy that used to do births in the Black Sea in the 60s. You know, there were photos of that. And that is part of what led to the resurgence of midwifery nationwide or globally.
Yep.
But then those like when it became stylized, very black and white, I remember that.
Yeah.
I guess that's a really kind of terrifying and maybe great question or situation for someone like a birth photographer. But do you think movement and momentum could ever have happened without photography?
Yeah, I think it would have, but not at the pace. I mean, like for instance, the 90% of the posts on Badass Mother Birther are birth photography.
Right.
Yes.
Like Flora Cruz's whole platform is based on expanding the reach of these birth photographers' advocacy images, right? And it's an extraordinary tool, really.
Yeah.
And it's underestimated and undervalued, I think. Birth photographers has historically been very close with midwives.
Yeah.
And that's not so much happening in the hospital.
Right.
Do you think that's like a lost opportunity? What's happening in that dynamic when you are in a hospital?
I mean, I always tell people that I feel really lucky that I'm here in Denver, because I think Denver is a very welcoming birth community. And we have a lot of midwife-based hospital practices here in Denver. And we have a very thriving community midwifery base here, which means we have transfers. And there's been a lot of work done over the years to kind of bridge the gap between the two. I think the hospital overall, like for me, you know, the hospital is a welcoming place. I feel very welcome in hospitals, but I was just before I came here, I was on a Zoom call with a bunch of birth photographers from Birth Becomes You. We were talking about trauma and some of the stories they shared about being in the hospital and having to witness, again, that witness piece, witness this stuff happen over and over and over again.
Yes.
They were, people crying, you know, it's really hard because we not only have to see it, but then we have to go home and we have to look at those photos. We have to edit those images. We have to decide, okay, like,
what am I going to share?
What am I going to share? Am I going to give this to my client, or is this, you know, and that's a really hard, and that's a hard role to play too, because, you know, we're not just we are documenting, but we're also then having to craft the story. And that's a big burden.
That's another point
To have as a photographer.
That's a lot of weight.
And I love what you shared about how you went home and you looked at your birth images and you saw those images of you smiling and laughing, you know, and it made me just think, God, like every birth that I go to, I have to be so thoughtful about the moments that I capture and what are the moments that I'm not capturing and why am I making these choices and what is my own bias or influence that's making you decide what to
say.
I was thinking that was my next question.
Yeah,
I was thinking that too. I was like, well, what if there were pictures of you screaming?
Right.
And she chose.
Yeah.
In fact, I had this happen once. I had a different birth photographer than Melissa Kate covering a birth once. And she was snapping. And it was a rough birth. But the MA came out and they did okay. And then, you know, postpartum and mom recovered, whatever. And then she called me and at like 2 weeks postpartum and she was like, I feel like I'm going crazy.
Oh, wow.
I was like, what's going on? And she's like, I just got sent my birth photos and there's only 22 of them. And she was in there with me for 5 hours clicking. I know she took more than 22 pictures and I don't see any of the chaos. And so I had to reach out to that birth photographer and be like,
you need to share that. Yeah.
Censor this.
But, and coming prior to midwifery as being a doula, right? Sometimes I'd like walk in for our first 48-hour postpartum or 24-hour postpartum. And I'm like ready to talk about all the trauma we just went through.
Yeah.
Right? I'm like, by the way, you were like obstetrically raped and all of your autonomy was taken from you. And do you know all these things? Right. And they're just like, I had such a great birth.
And you're like, yes.
Okay. And then I question, is it my responsibility to tell someone that that is not okay, that was trauma. And someone brought it back one day. They said, if you saw someone unconscious that was raped in an alley, do you tell them? Absolutely, you tell them.
Yeah.
But just because it's birth, we share.
Well, it's because birth is so deeply ingrained in the patriarchy, and the patriarch is so about the adult figure that knows more, the infantilization of women that happens. Absolutely. This reminds me of like how I talk with folks about postpartum processing after there is a trauma. I talk about it like there's a necklace that we're stringing when we are having an experience. It was like this necklace of our experience, and every memory, every moment, everything you can think back is a bead, right? And so normally when there's not a trauma, like you finish stringing your necklace, you get to the end of your experience, a knot is naturally tied in, like that experience is over. And then you wear the necklace out into the world and you tell people, oh, this happened here and this happened here, right? But when a trauma happens, the necklace breaks and falls onto the floor before it's tied. And so the first job in trauma recovery is to collect all the beads.
Yeah.
And then the next job is to figure out what order they go in. And what happens in that figuring out phase is oftentimes you discover that you actually have collected other people's beads who've fallen on the ground. These other birth story pieces that were the nurse's fear, grandma's worry, people that maybe weren't at your birth, they gifted you beads into this basket of mess that you're trying to figure out. And you also sometimes end up with lint and like garbage that was on the floor. Like it's not even true. Like stuff from the community that's like babies die at home births. Well, that's the lint garbage that got left from our cultural, whatever. And so a midwife's job, and this is how I teach my students, a midwife's job is to be there at the time when we're still gathering before we started stringing, so we can say, let's talk about closely. Look closely here. This is garbage off the floor. This doesn't belong on your birth experience necklace. Put that down.
Yeah.
Or that story bead belongs to your nurse. I was there. That didn't actually happen. And so I think we do have a responsibility to like course correct. And what's fascinating about birth photography, bring it back again, is that you guys like literally have the story beads.
Right.
They're right there. Every image is like, oh, we can put it in order. And like, there's how it happened.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you leaning into that idea of like the way that you share these, the timing, even the way that you edit them changes that person's awareness of their own story. And because we are so in our bodies, sometimes we forget or are unaware, or oxytocin does its job and we have total amnesia. And it's really powerful. One message that I was given, I want to circle back to this. One message I was given, I had a birth photographer at all three of my births. 25 years ago. And one thing that I was told by my birth photographer, who was one of those early ones, black and white, whatever, she said, I'm going to give you these. And it was all print, there was nothing digital. She's like, I'm going to give you these, but I want you to promise you won't look at them until you're at least a month postpartum. And I was like, why? I want to look at them right now. She's like, because it is outside your body. Therefore, it will potentially, and it's more powerful.
Yes.
It will potentially override your memory of the experience. And I want you to stay embodied in your experience before you get my vision of what happened. And it was really powerful for me. I really respected that. I didn't open them for a whole month. I mean, they were actual prints, because you get them printed. That's how old I am. But I didn't look for a whole month. And I remember thinking, that is not what I remember. I remember seeing the difference. I wonder how this happens for you with people in memory versus, because it's instant. We live in this instant world.
Yeah.
And they probably want them next day.
Right. I mean, I always tell my clients, like, I don't know, like 10 preview images, just kind of like highlight moments so they have a little bit. But I do kind of follow exactly what your birth photographer did. And I don't typically give images until 4 to 6 weeks after birth, because I really want them to have the opportunity to integrate the story and to use those birth images after they kind of set the foundation in their own mind of what happened. And they can keep the photos that they feel like fit with their story, and the photos that they feel like maybe don't. They can process that with their midwife or their partner and decide what they want to do with those. If they want to delete them, they can delete them. But I've had over the years, similar stories as you've shared, where people are like, wow, I was so much calmer and more chill than I thought. But then I've had people say, gosh, like these birth photos are hard for me to look at, I think it's different than a portrait session. A portrait session, you're going with this kind of very clear goal in mind. You want to get a nice family photo for Thanksgiving card. I don't know. You want these photos to hang on your wall. Birth photography is a little bit different because I can't guarantee at the end
that you'll like
that you're going to love the images and you're going to want to, you're going to maybe love them in a way that, it's an important moment in your life and you're going to want to have that to reflect on. But I can't necessarily guarantee that it's going to be butterflies and roses when you look at your birth images.
Well, exactly. And it's precisely because birth is not daylight. Birth is not normality. Birth is outside of our normal experience. And it lays it peels back even this rawness, right? I mean, even if you are birthing by cesarean, right, numb and laying on a table, there's a huge degree of vulnerability there, right? And so it peels back this mask that we wear every day, and it gets into the meat of who we are. And I think some people don't love who they are. And some people also, then we talk about all the layers, they have influences from externally that has changed their experience or even changed who they are that you then see. Like, I think I've heard a lot of people very frustrated by their birth experiences when they have obstetric care because it didn't match what they wanted it to be. Maybe they've been following, the candlelight white nightgown, and you play photos on maybe Instagram, and they're like, oh, I want that birth. But instead they get, the hospital scenario, and they don't like it.
I know that we need to go back into your story. I do want to know, though, just because you both have said that you had birth photographers at your photos, Augustine and Zul. And so, like, how did you know you wanted that?
That's like,
how did you know, like, yes, I want a birth photographer?
Well, I had it for my second baby. So I was already a midwife for around, for several years.
But you didn't go to your first.
No, I didn't even know that existed. My mom couldn't even be there. But for me, I am deeply in love with birth photography because of the symbolic aspect of it.
Yeah.
And it was a tool that I always saw, honestly, as processing. As there were so many conversations that for me, when they received the pictures, the clients, and even as a student midwife, triggered that closing of the care. Right, because they will receive the pictures usually like 6 weeks later, and so many questions will come out and so many expressions, and people are like, I did that, oh my God, I was thinking, but I look beautiful, things like that. So for me, but my story is so ridiculous because I had my favorite birth photographer that I wanted at my birth, and then my birth was like 3 days, and of course I sent her home, and then I didn't call her. Then my midwives called her, but this is like literally by the 3rd day. So honestly, every picture I have a face like I'm like a torture chef. And I'm like, are you kidding me? So I look at my birth and I'm like, really? But it gave me that. It gave me that story back. And a question so that's why I wanted to see what would I feel, what would I see. I was aware that I was gonna see something different, and it didn't until today. I see it. My picture was shared. In Europe somewhere, and someone was like, "So that's you," and it was amazing. Like I had one of the picture was I had a VBAC, and at the end of those 3 days, my midwife said, "Catch your baby," and I said no. And she was my mentor, right? But she still said, "Catch your baby." And what I remember until this day was when I touched the body of my baby, and that's in a picture.
Yeah.
So I remember that, but with my heart, right? Like you cannot see it, and then I got to see it.
Yeah.
So it happen. So that's what I got, and that's like for me, you guys are angels. But I do have a question for you. So within my love of birth photography, and then in social media, I have seen a change. So in my case, because I love birth photography, I do tend to call the same people because I trust them. I trust their integrity. I trust that they can self-regulate if something is happening. So I usually...
Or give the right photos or all the photos so that they're not choosing that weight.
Absolutely.
God.
Absolutely. So I know that they're, that's going to happen the way that it needs to happen. So a question for you. Now that birth photography is such in a height, do you believe that is a code of ethics in birth photography? Yes, no? Do you think that it should be?
Yeah, I can definitely share about that. So along with, when I started as my own business, my best friend, she was another birth photographer, Jennifer Mason, she's in Michigan. We really saw a need for a safe and supportive community for birth photographers to learn and grow and to talk about things like this. And so we started Birth Becomes You back in 2014. So pretty soon after I started actually photographing births. And that community is international and absolutely, I think, transformational. And within that community, I think this code of ethics has developed over time where birth photographers are meeting and talking on a daily, weekly, monthly basis about what it means to enter into that space and how to do it in a way that is so respectful and aware of what we are actually taking part of. And I think it's changed birth photographers from like these photographers that like to take birth pictures into birth photographers becoming true birth workers who are really deeply invested in being part of the birth team, where we're not just standing out on the periphery and taking pictures, but that we are in good relationship with the midwives and the doulas, and they feel safe having us in their space. Because, I've heard some stories about birth photographers coming in and saying and doing things that are deeply,
I had one that was reaching into the tub and repositioning the baby.
Yeah.
I'm like,
What?
Yes.
Stop.
Yes.
You can't
Yes.
touch my baby right now.
Yes.
It's like not okay. Not my
Yes.
baby, like one of my clients. And I was like, no, birth photographers don't touch her.
Well, or Augustine, what you said, I just recently heard something similar of someone having a birth, and for hours the birth photographer was there and then just giving them 25 pictures.
Yeah.
And she was like, no, this is the package. This is what I'm giving you.
Right, this is it.
And
Yeah.
you're going to have to pay. And it was the amount was it was thousands of dollars. And then on top of that, she said, I'm going to give them to you, but you cannot post them because this is my brand.
Right.
So this is my art. So you get to have them after you pay me on top of what you already pay. And please do not short them because they don't have my logo.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a whole,
Ethics,
there's a
right?
lot. And so, we started Birth Becomes You because we wanted to create a community. And then we actually started the very kind of foundational first birth photography education program. And so we have birth photographers that it's a 6-week program. It's not just like a weekend workshop, 6 weeks. And we talk about the photography piece, which, honestly, to me, it's not the hard part. It's really the holding space. It's knowing how to go into births that are complicated, that are difficult. It's knowing how to put the birthing person above, above my own, because photographers are very protective. I mean, you meet with a bunch of photographers and we're talking about copyrights and we're talking about, this and that. And as a birth photographer myself, at the end of the day, I'm there to serve this family, and I put that above anything else. Maybe that may seem like that photographer, but I don't know. I
think that is exactly the difference between when you're a photographer and when you become a birth worker.
Right.
There you go.
That transition that happened with your wave of photography is what's so unique.
Yes.
You became a birth worker when you stopped centering copyrights and the art. And
exactly.
You center the birthing person, and that's what's extraordinary.
And I mean, I still have, there's birth photographers within my community that, sometimes get upset about, well, my client shared this and she put a filter on it and I don't like this, or, and I always try to remind everybody, it doesn't matter. All of this stuff, I know we do have to protect ourselves. We want to be good business owners. We want to do X, Y, or Z. But, I've had clients who, haven't been able to pay me because of a financial situation. And a lot of people would recommend, well, you need to hold on to those photos and don't give them their birth photos and keep the birth photos until they pay you. And I understand that from a business perspective, I really do. And I understand that advice. But as a human being and as a birth worker and as someone who I genuinely believe that all of my clients are good people, and they're I don't hold on to those images. If there's a situation where they really can't pay me, I am inclined to obviously, hope that they're going to pay me. And, in every single case they have eventually, but I'm not going to hold their birth photos ransom, because at the end of the day, I want them to have those images. But that's just me. And I mean, there's a lot of birth photographers that are going to hear this and be like, oh my gosh, Monet, what are you saying? But I really do. I do think that this work is sacred work. And I do think that, I'm very lucky that I get paid to do it. But at the end of the day, I would show up to a birth for free still, because it's such a sacred experience, and it really is.
It's very midwifey of you.
I know, that's what I was thinking about.
So, Augustine, what about you? Why did you choose it? No, yeah, because
Well, I mean, this is here we are right there. I had a plan. I did plan, and I had an assisted birth, and I knew that I was going to be very in the experience.
Yeah.
And I knew that there was no one clinical to tell me what happened.
Right.
So I have photographs because I wanted to be in both places at both times.
I have a lot of midwife clients. I have a lot of midwives that hire me. And I think it is maybe for that reason, is just being able for them to look back and say, oh, okay, like, so there was like a double nuchal cord here, and my baby's, like what after I would give it, you know what I mean? Like there's like all that stuff that I think is, but I mean, my relationship with midwives is truly, I think I credit it everything, it's why my business is, it's why I'm here, is the relationship that I have with the midwives and the midwives here in Denver and around the world. I mean, you guys are the ones sharing our images and talking about these stories, and my midwives here locally, I've been so amazed at their willingness to just have me come in and be in that space, because I do think, it's obviously vulnerable for the clients, but it's also vulnerable for the midwives, to have somebody. I always tell my students, imagine you're doing your job and you have somebody that you don't really know with a camera documenting every single moment. That's a big thing, it is a big thing. And you guys are doing sometimes some really high adrenaline you're handling some high adrenaline situations. So that's what we talk about. But then Birth Becomes You is like, what do we do in those situations when things are getting really hairy? Like, how do we still document, but also make sure that the providers know and feel like this is going to be as low adrenaline as possible. And so we're not, in your face taking 1,000 pictures. We're stepping back, still documenting what happens, but walking that line. And I think as birth photographers, we constantly have to do that. And even when the birth is going normally and perfectly, having somebody in there with a camera is a big deal. And so it changes.
Well, there's still states where midwives are illegal.
Yes.
Or it's illegal to do a certain type of birth, as an example. And if they hire a birth photographer,
there's proof.
So
breach,
this
baby.
is how you put me in jail.
Yeah.
It is very scary. And so there is still, I think, some fear.
There is. And there's definitely like older midwives that I have never worked with here in Colorado. And I know the reason why. And it's because they don't want me to be in their space. And that's fine. That's, I'm not going to judge that. I understand that we all have our own issues and traumas and histories.
But it is remarkable, the ones that do invite you in.
It is. And even here in Colorado, there are births here that I've done that are not allowed. And, to still have those midwives have me come in that space and to still say, yeah, you can share those images.
Because those midwives are centering the birthing.
They are.
Yes. And that's
and they want change, because honestly, being able to say like, hey, these twins were born at home safely here. It shows this whole state that there are other ways of doing things.
That's right.
And I think that is incredibly important and incredibly powerful. And I think that
really
vulnerable. It's vulnerable and it's risky. And I have those conversations with those midwives, and I'm never one to share something without asking for their permission. If it's something that is, illegal or whatever we want to call it. I hate using those words around birth because it just feels like
birth can't be.
This is ridiculous, But even coming in as a birth photographer, you have to know how to hold that space, and you have to know how to document without being intrusive, without throwing the birthing person out of that hormonal cascade. And so I always think of birth photographers, we're kind of like these magicians, because you do have to walk this very fine line. It's not like, you know, I go to weddings and I see the wedding photographers and they're all over the place and they're doing all the, you know what I mean? They're moving and birth photographers really have to come in with this sense of stillness. We have to have really regulated nervous systems.
Absolutely.
We have to walk in with that. And if we don't, I think it changes the whole dynamic.
Yeah. And that is something that why I didn't hire a birth photographer, because I'm like this like natural performer for anyone in the ring. And I was so terrified that if I heard the snap, I would open my eyes.
Right.
Or if I heard the snap, I would move my head, you know, to look better for the photos, or something. It would make me try to be a something that didn't exist, and then I'd have more cortisol and less oxytocin, and then I would stall, and then I would have to transfer, and then it was just all this fear. And the photographer is what like solidified me that I could only trust my body when I wasn't being documented. And it sucks. That really sucks.
But it's
not
also
looking
very
back.
insightful.
It's totally insightful.
It's true for a lot of people. I know that that's true, but I don't have a memory of my birth, and it would be great to have had that memory. But it goes the opposite as a midwife with photographers, because I lean into the performance that I get to try to be my best self.
Sure.
Oh, as a midwife,
as a midwife,
because someone is there.
Because someone is there.
Right.
I get to elevate to be the best midwife I can be.
Being witness brings that out in you.
Yes. So instead of being like, oh, do I look good in this photograph of me? No, I'm like, I got gloves on. You know, like I'm not reaching into this stuff without gloves because there's a birth photographer here. Like I'm able to elevate myself to a better midwifery.
That's like to keep your standard. I call a good birth photographer for me is like birth ninja.
Yes.
You know, they can be in different places and I don't hear, I'm like, was she there? No, now she's here.
Oh, I love that. I had a couple experiences where their mom's like, I'm so happy, but I'm so sad the photographer.
Oh,
Click, click.
I love it.
I love totally unobtrusive. They never knew. Well, I have I know we have to end soon because we're on it, but I have one final question for you, and that is to see if you could give midwives advice. Photographers, especially birth photographers, have been extraordinary at building profitable businesses. And midwives are simply not. And I know that midwives have a number of hardships and challenges that photographers don't face. But I wonder if you could, with all your years of witnessing all these midwives, tell us any advice you have.
I really love that question because just thinking about it, I know more than a handful of clients that are completely and organically okay with paying $3,000 for a birth photographer, but just cannot get it together for a midwife to pay $3,000. They're just so against paying a midwife the same amount of money they would pay for a birth photographer. And is it because we are not setting ourselves, like setting boundaries for ourselves and setting standards and expectations for ourselves, like birth photographers are? Like, what is that?
I mean, I've thought about many times. I've been like, oh, I want to be a midwife. You know, I've really thought about that. And all my midwife friends are like, Monet, they were like, do not do it. They were like, you make way more money than we do, and you are like, your job's a lot, not easier, but less,
responsibility.
Less responsibility.
So why is that?
I think a lot of it, again, I'm going to point back to that Birth Becomes You community. It's an amazing community of photographers who are so committed to elevating the profession. I look at my midwife friends all the time and I'm like, why are you guys not charging more money?
Okay, number one,
charge your money, charge your worth.
I mean, no one, if I had told somebody 10 years ago that I was going to charge $3,000 to show up to your birth and take pictures of your vagina, they would have looked at me like I was completely crazy, you know?
Well, so you've built an industry, you've built a market.
Right. And I've also, you've built a market, and you've also said, like, we all know, because we do the same hours as midwives. We know how it is. It is so demanding to hold space day in and day out, and to be available, to be on call. It is so demanding to go to a birth and not know when you're going to come home and not know how long this is going to go. It is so much. And I think every person that enters the birth space needs to charge more. And I say that not because I want it to be a financial hardship for families, because I don't. I really don't. And I know that there is financial constraints on all of us. And for some families, it's really, really hard to find a way to pay for that. But I also think our births we know they're transformational, and we need to make a cultural shift where we as a culture are willing to invest as much money into our births as we do into our weddings. I mean, people are spending $20, $30, $40, $100,000 on their weddings. And yet the idea of spending that much money on your birth is just crazy. Like, why would we ever do that?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, our births are going to probably, 50% of marriages end in divorce, first of all. So, who knows if you're going to be married to this person in 10 years. And two, births change us in such a transformational, soul level way. Why are we not taught that it's okay to invest a little bit more, and or a lot more. So I think midwives need to charge more money. Ooh. And I think it is, and I will say that it's, within the Birth Becomes You community, a lot of us kind of got on that same page. And so when all birth photographers are starting to charge this much, then suddenly this is how much they need to charge. Yeah. And so when there are midwives that are still charging, not enough, I'm not going to throw numbers, but poverty wages, then, that's going to kind of be like, well, this person's only charging this much. So why would I, and I think you guys, not you all, but I do think that there is.
Take it. Go ahead. Talk great to us.
Yeah. And or, really get our medical health system in support of midwifery, where our Medicaid reimbursement a livable wage.
And that's a whole other topic, which I think is just completely, I was just talking about that earlier today. I was like, it really does come down to what insurances are willing to compensate for, that's awful. And that needs to change. But I also think midwives need to band together and say, we have to.
A majority of midwives are billing cash.
Right.
Yeah.
Insurance and Medicaid is great. And
I just don't want to price out an entire community of people who can't have a midwife.
Yes. But I think that is actually, I don't know if that's true belief.
I agree.
I think it's just that we, as a culture, are not used to spending that money. But I do think that there are ways that, people spend money, the amount of money we spend on our phones every year, the amount we spend on our just cars, it's just that's not been the
midwifery has not been valued. Right. The way that these other things do.
Right.
So we need to create more value, create this market, ultimately band together and charge more. And that will change the industry. I 100% agree.
Yeah.
Well, before we close out, can you tell us more about Birth Becomes You?
Yes.
What kind of offerings do you give birth photographers and birth workers? And what's coming up? Anything fun?
Well, you should definitely follow us on Instagram, Birth Becomes You, at Birth Becomes You. And then we have a ton of resources online. We have an online, like I said, training certification program for birth photographers. We have presets and editing tools. And then we have a really wonderful Facebook community. And that is where I would point you to go to first. If you just search on Facebook, you'll find us. And that community, of course, is just free. And it truly is. These are some of my best friends all over the world. Amazing people. Even if you're not a birth photographer, if you're in love with birth, I think it's a good community to join. And we are launching we're redoing our website right now. So we're going to have a brand new, beautiful website in December. And our next cohort of birth photography students will start in January. So if you're interested, thinking about it, join us.
Another thought that came to my mind too, as we were talking about success and how business, you have a product that's a visual example of what they're paying for.
Right. Yeah.
And midwives kind of don't, right? Like we do, but can you?
What are you buying?
What are you buying?
Yeah.
Like, right? Giving you your marketing is your
website.
Your website. So for us to create a website, we need you.
Yeah, you do. I mean, and I will say that a lot of the birth photographers, a lot of the midwives, and birth centers in Colorado that have been successful because they have recognized that and they have partnered with me and we have worked together. And my images have helped bring clients into them. And then when their clients hire me, it's like this beautiful circle. So if you're a midwife, find a birth photographer in your community and invite your
community, find a Birth Becomes You community photographer.
Yeah, it's on our website, birthbecomesYou.com. Absolutely. But yes, I mean, that's a great point. I think, the midwives that are doing really well, they are, at least here in Denver, are the midwives that welcome us in their space.
I opened a birth center in 2010 with birth photographer on staff.
Yeah.
And I always had a birth photographer on staff because a picture says 1,000 words.
It does. Yeah. It absolutely does. It is valuable. So,
and everyone wins. Like the birth photographer gets a bigger portfolio.
Right.
I have marketing images and the clients are extraordinary.
Are happy. Yeah. Exactly. Yes. Win.
Even in our room right now, we have our resident photographers for the Midwifery Wisdom Collective that are here taking photos of the event because we can't show someone about how impactful learning how to do a urinary catheter is without a photo of it.
Exactly.
It's nothing. So if you're listening, please find their Birth Becomes You Facebook community. Join even if you're not a birth photographer so that you can get connected to Birth Becomes You photographers around the world.
Absolutely.
And this is one of our very rare live episodes. So if you're listening to this, you're listening to us live and we are actually here in Denver with you. And we are at the Midwifery Wisdom Experience, our annual conference. We're going to have our first ever photography showcase, which we're excited to showcase some of your Birth Becomes You members who have won the competition. We'll offer that again next year. And there are still tickets available, both online and in person. So check us out, midwiferywisdom.com. Thank you so much, Monet.
So glad to be here.